No woman dared to mate with the wild-haired Alpha King, until a rejected Omega stepped forward. Hello, everyone. There are wounds a woman learns to hide so well that eventually people mistake her silence for healing. Aloan hardly knew that kind of wound. And on the night she entered Mooncrest Citadel, she had no idea she was walking toward a man whose loneliness wore a far more frightening face than hers. Before we continue, subscribe and tap the notification bell if you enjoy stories of courage, destiny, and second chances. Your support helps this channel grow. Now, back to Aloan. Mooncrest Citadel rose above the mountain forest like something carved from winter itself, its gray towers silver beneath a swollen moon. Carriages crowded the torchlit courtyard as delegations arrived from packs across the kingdom for the royal mating convocation. Inside, music drifted beneath vaulted ceilings, silk gowns whispered across polished stone, and every conversation circled one name: Ronan Blackwood, the Alpha King. Aloan kept near the Silverpine delegation, exactly where someone of her rank was expected to remain. At 23, she had become practiced at taking up little space. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves over a modest blue-gray dress, and beneath its collar rested the silver oak leaf pendant her mother had left her. Her fingers found it whenever the room felt too crowded. Tonight, they rarely left it. You don't have to look so terrified. Gavin Mercer's voice came from beside her. Aloan's hand stilled. 2 years had passed since Gavin had stood before Silverpine Pack and rejected her as his mate. 2 years since she had learned that humiliation could have a sound. The uncomfortable silence of people relieved it was happening to someone else. She looked at him now, the same dark blonde hair, the same blue eyes, the same effortless confidence that had once made her believe kindness and courage were the same thing. "I'm not terrified," she said. Gavin studied her, perhaps searching for the girl who used to soften whenever he spoke. Then try to look pleased to be here. Aloan almost smiled. She had come as one of Silverpine's infirmary attendants, not as a candidate for the king. No one expected a rejected Omega to stand among noble daughters competing for a crown. That suited her. She had stopped wanting to be chosen long ago. A ceremonial horn sounded. Conversation died. The great bronze doors at the far end of the hall opened, and something changed in the air. Royal guards entered first. Captain Everett Shaw led them in black armor, his expression unreadable. Lord Chancellor Dorian Whitlock followed, severe in formal robes. Then the Alpha King crossed the threshold. Aloan understood the whispers immediately. Ronan Blackwood was enormous, broad-shouldered and dressed entirely in black, but it was his hair that drew the eye. Dark brown, thick and untamed, it swept nearly to his shoulders as though no courtier had dared bring scissors near him in years. A pale scar traced the left side of his face. His silver-gray eyes moved across the assembled packs without warmth. Women who had spent weeks preparing to attract him suddenly stopped smiling. One lowered her gaze. Another took an unconscious step backward. Ronan noticed. His expression did not change. That, strangely, was what caught Aloan. Not his size. Not the scar. Not the dangerous stillness surrounding him. It was the brief tightening of his jaw before he climbed the dais, as if being feared was neither surprising nor painless anymore. Aloan knew that expression. She had worn her own version after Gavin rejected her. Across the hall, Brielle Sutton stood among the chosen candidates in ivory silk, beautiful and composed. Yet even she seemed to hold her breath when Ronan passed. Chancellor Whitlock raised his hand. Tonight, by ancient law, His Majesty opens the royal courtship before the gathered packs. The silence deepened. Aloan felt Gavin shift beside her. At the dais, Ronan looked over the women waiting beneath the moonlit windows. None met his eyes for long. Then his gaze moved beyond them, traveling through nobles, guards, healers, and servants until, for one suspended heartbeat, it passed across Aloan. She expected coldness. Instead, she saw something she recognized far too well. A man standing in a crowded room as though he were completely alone. And somewhere among the waiting women, someone whispered, "Who will dare go first?" The question seemed to settle over the hall like frost. Chancellor Whitlock lowered his hand, and a young woman from the eastern packs entered the moonlit circle first. She was poised until she reached Ronan. Then her courage faltered. "Your Majesty," she murmured, "I respectfully withdraw." No anger crossed Ronan's face. He inclined his head once. "Granted." Relief softened her features as she hurried away. A second candidate approached, then a third. One blamed an existing family obligation. Another could barely speak before asking permission to leave. Each time, Ronan answered with the same restrained courtesy. Aloan watched from beside Gavin, disturbed less by the refusals than by what happened after them. Smiles returned the instant each woman reached safety. Nervous whispers spread. The king remained alone beneath the carved silver crest, forced to receive every rejection as though it meant nothing. Aloan knew how exhausting that performance could be. "This is becoming embarrassing," Gavin muttered. She glanced at him. "For whom?" He gave her a puzzled look, but the herald called another name before he could answer. "Lady Brielle Sutton." The room stirred. Brielle crossed the floor in ivory silk, her posture flawless. Unlike the others, she did not immediately look away. For several seconds, she and Ronan regarded each other across the ceremonial circle. "Lady Sutton," Chancellor Whitlock said, "do you freely consent to enter royal courtship with His Majesty?" Brielle swallowed. Aloan saw her fingers tighten around the fabric at her hip. Ronan saw it too. "You may answer freely," he said. His voice was deep, controlled, almost gentler than his appearance suggested. "No consequence will follow your refusal." Brielle's composure cracked with visible relief. "Then forgive me, Your Majesty. I cannot." A murmur rolled through the nobles. Dorian's expression hardened, but Ronan merely stepped aside and allowed her to leave. That should have ended the moment quietly. Instead, someone near the back whispered, "She knows the stories." Another voice answered, "Everyone does." Ronan's shoulders went rigid. Everett Shaw shifted near the dais, instantly attentive. Aloan felt the atmosphere sharpen. Ronan curled one hand at his side. His knuckles whitened. Several candidates recoiled before he had moved an inch toward them. "Look," Gavin breathed. "This is what they warned us about." But Aloan was already looking. A thin line of red appeared beneath Ronan's clenched fingers and slipped across his palm. He was digging his nails into his own skin, not preparing to attack, restraining himself. The realization struck her with unexpected force. Everyone was watching for a monster, so no one noticed the man hurting himself to make certain the monster they feared never appeared. Chancellor Whitlock stepped forward. "Perhaps a brief recess." "No," Ronan's answer cut through the chamber. He opened his wounded hand slowly, forcing his fingers to relax. "Continue." Marin Caldwell, standing near the royal physicians, took a half-step toward him, but Ronan gave her a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. She stopped. Aloan noticed that too. The ceremony resumed, though whatever hope had filled the hall earlier was gone. Two more women withdrew without entering the circle. A third began crying before her name was fully announced. Ronan released her from consideration immediately. By then, nobody whispered about becoming queen. They whispered about escape. Aloan's chest tightened with an emotion she did not want to name. She remembered standing before Silverpine while Gavin severed their bond. Remembered searching familiar faces for one person willing to see her pain instead of her humiliation. No one had. Now hundreds of people were doing something painfully similar to Ronan. Gavin leaned closer. "At least you never had to face something like this." Aloan turned toward him slowly. He seemed unaware of the cruelty hidden inside the sentence. Before she could answer, Chancellor Whitlock surveyed the dwindling line of candidates. "Is there any eligible woman present who will willingly enter the circle?" Silence answered him. One by one, those nearest the ceremonial boundary lowered their eyes. Then Gavin gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Apparently, even a rejected Omega has better instincts than to volunteer for this." Aloan felt the old wound open, and this time, something inside her refused to bow. Gavin's words should have made Aloan smaller. Once they would have. Instead, she released the oak leaf pendant beneath her collar and let her hand fall to her side. "Eligible women of the gathered packs," Chancellor Whitlock called again, strain beginning to show beneath his formality. "The invitation remains open." No one moved. Ronan stood beneath the royal crest with blood drying across his palm. He did not search the crowd for another candidate. Somehow, that made the spectacle harder to watch. He looked like a man who had already accepted the answer. Gavin folded his arms. End it. Whatever woman they dragged forward now would only be doing it for a crown. Aloan looked at him. 2 years earlier, he had chosen status over the bond between them. then expected her to carry the shame quietly so his future could remain uncomplicated. Now he spoke of courage as though he had never demanded its price from someone else. Maybe that isn't why everyone makes a choice, she said. Gavin frowned. What does that mean? Aloan didn't answer. She stepped away from him. The first sound was only the soft tap of her shoe against stone. Then another. Heads turned as she passed beyond the Silver Pine delegation. Someone recognized her. That's Hartley. A second voice followed. Mercer's rejected Omega. The words traveled faster than she did. Aloan felt them gathering behind her, but she kept walking. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs. She was afraid. That mattered. Courage without fear had always seemed too easy to her. Everett's attention snapped toward her as she approached the ceremonial boundary. Dorian stared as though she had violated some rule he had forgotten to announce. Marin Caldwell said nothing, but her expression sharpened with interest. Ronan finally lifted his eyes. Aloan stopped at the edge of the circle. Up close, he seemed even more formidable, yet she noticed the details distance had hidden, the exhaustion beneath his eyes, the rigid control in his posture, the injured hand he kept. Turned away from the audience. Your name? Dorian asked. Aloan Hartley. Silverpine Pack. Recognition flickered through the Chancellor's face. Rank. A familiar humiliation pressed against her chest. She refused to let it bend her spine. Omega. A murmur broke across the chamber. And previously rejected, Gavin called from behind her. Aloan closed her eyes for one heartbeat. Of course he would make certain they knew. When she opened them, Ronan was no longer looking at Gavin. He was watching her. Is that relevant to her eligibility? His question was directed at Dorian. Not under ancient law, Your Majesty. Then it is irrelevant here. The room quieted. Aloan felt something inside her loosen, not because Ronan had rescued her, but because he had refused to let another man define her before she could speak for herself. Ronan descended one step from the dais. You heard what happened tonight. Yes. You heard what they believe about me. Some of it. And you still came forward. Aloan met his silver-gray gaze. Every instinct urged her to choose her next words carefully. I watched women make their choice tonight, Your Majesty. I believe I'm entitled to make mine. Something shifted behind his expression. Not softness. Not yet. Surprise, perhaps. Then choose freely, he said. If you enter that circle, no one owns the decision but you. Aloan glanced at the pale boundary carved into the floor. Beyond it waited a future she could not understand. Behind her stood the life in which everyone already believed they knew her worth. She stepped across. A collective breath swept through the hall. I will enter royal courtship, she said, if you'll allow me. Ronan stared at her as though she had spoken in a language only he could hear. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the silver leaf at her throat before returning to her face. Why? The question was so quiet that the room seemed to disappear around them. Aloan could have offered duty, destiny, or compassion. None would have been true enough. Because everyone here decided what you are before giving you the chance to answer for yourself. Her voice steadied. I know what that feels like. For the first time that evening, Ronan's control visibly fractured, not into rage, but something far more vulnerable. He descended the final step, stopping several feet from her. Aloan Hartley, he said, before I accept your choice, you need to hear mine. Before I accept your choice, Ronan said, you need to hear mine. Aloan remained inside the moon's circle while hundreds waited for the king to claim the woman who had finally dared approach him. Instead, Ronan stopped several feet away. I will not accept a mate who chooses me out of pity. Aloan felt the words strike somewhere tender. I don't pity you. His attention shifted briefly toward Gavin. Then perhaps humiliation brought you here. Sometimes pain makes revenge feel like courage. A flush climbed Aloan's throat. You think I crossed this room because of him? I think a wounded person deserves time before making a decision that can change her life. That silenced her. Ronan wasn't questioning her worth. He was questioning whether she had been given enough freedom to know her own heart. Chancellor Whitlock stepped forward. Your Majesty, her declaration satisfies ancient law. The preliminary bond may proceed. No, the answer echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Dorian stiffened. So did Aloan. The ceremony ends here, Ronan said. A restless murmur swept through the court. Behind Aloan, Gavin released a breath that sounded dangerously close to relief. Ronan ignored him. Miss Hartley will be given a guest chamber for the night. A royal carriage will remain available until sunrise. If she chooses Silverpine, she leaves without penalty, obligation, or disgrace. He looked directly at her. No one will say you failed me. Aloan's heartbeat slowed. The most feared man in the kingdom had just been offered the only woman willing to stand beside him, and his first act was to give her an escape. And if I stay? She asked. Something unreadable passed through his silver-gray eyes. Then tomorrow you tell me again, when there is no audience to impress and no former mate to defy. He turned toward Everett, but Gavin crossed the floor before the captain could reach Aloan. Come home, Gavin said under his breath. You made your point. My point. You embarrassed everyone who ever called you weak. Fine. It's done. Aloan stared at the man who had once decided her future in front of an entire pack. You still believe every choice I make somehow belongs to you. Gavin's jaw tightened. I'm trying to keep you from ruining your life. No. You're trying to feel important in it again. She stepped around him. Gavin caught her wrist. The hall seemed to inhale. Ronan was beside them almost instantly. His hand closed around Gavin's forearm. Not crushing, not striking, simply immovable. Something dangerous flashed through his face, but his voice remained quiet. Release her. Gavin obeyed. Ronan let go at once. Then, instead of pulling Aloan toward himself, he stepped back. Are you hurt? She looked at the reddening mark around her wrist. No. Ronan's gaze lingered there for 1 second before he turned to Everett. See that Miss Hartley reaches her room undisturbed. No threat followed. None was necessary. Hours later, Aloan stood at the window of a quiet guest chamber overlooking the black sweep of forest beneath the moon. Her traveling bag sat beside the door. She could leave before sunrise and return to the familiar life waiting at Silverpine. Ronan had made certain no lock, law, bond, or shame would stop her. Her fingers closed around her mother's silver oak leaf. For years, Aloan had imagined strength as the power to make others stay. Tonight, a feared king had shown her another kind. The strength to open the door and accept that someone might walk through it. Then a howl rose from somewhere beyond the eastern walls. Low, ragged, agonized. Aloan went still. It came again, carrying through the mountains with such naked suffering that her hand tightened against the pendant. She had spent years tending injuries in Silverpine's infirmary. She knew the difference between fury and pain. Whatever the kingdom believed about Ronan Blackwood, the sound outside her window was not a monster hunting. It was someone hurting alone. Aloan looked at the packed bag beside the door. Sunrise would bring her final chance to leave. For the first time that night, she wondered whether she wanted it. The second howl never came. By dawn, that silence bothered Aloan more than the sound itself. She found Ronan behind the royal infirmary, standing beside a frost-damp stone fountain. His wounded hand had been freshly bandaged, and his dark hair was loosely tied at his neck. A carriage waited beyond the eastern archway. For me? She asked. As promised. Ronan did not move toward her. Everett will escort you to Silverpine. Aloan studied his face. I heard you last night. His jaw tightened. Then leaving should be easier. Was that your wolf? A long pause. Yes. What was hurting him? Ronan's gaze shifted toward the mountains. Some wounds disliked being remembered. Before she could press him, a metal tray crashed inside the infirmary. Ronan flinched so violently that Aloan barely recognized him. His shoulders locked. His breathing stopped. For one strange instant, he was no longer looking at the courtyard. He was staring through it. Then came the sharp scent of blood. They rushed inside. A young stable hand had fallen against an open medicine cabinet, cutting his temple on broken glass. Aloan dropped beside him and pressed folded linen against the wound. Marin, the boy whimpered. Behind Aloan came a low, involuntary growl. She turned. Ronan stood near the doorway, one hand braced against the stone. His pupils had widened, and sweat shone along his brow despite the morning cold. Your Majesty? The stable hand whispered. Fear entered the boy's face. Ronan saw it. He immediately backed away. Get him away from me. Ronan, Aloan, stay with the boy. His voice carried command, but beneath it she heard something else. Terror. Not of the injured child. Of himself. Marin hurried in and took Aloan's place. I have him. Aloan rose, but she did not approach Ronan. Look at me. He squeezed his eyes shut. Not now. You're here. Mooncrest. The infirmary. His breath came unevenly. There's no battle here. His eyes opened. Something raw moved behind the silver gray. Slowly, the tension left his hands. When he could speak again, he said, "Smoke. Blood. Metal striking stone." Aloan waited. They were everywhere that night. He swallowed. Northern border. A village under siege. My brother was beside me. The rest seemed to cost him. I let my wolf loose because there was no other way to save the people trapped there. And your brother? Ronan looked toward the broken glass. I brought hundreds home. That was answer enough. Aloan felt grief settle between them without trying to soften it with words. Afterward, he continued, people remembered what they saw me become. Eventually, I began remembering it the same way. Marin glanced toward him from across the room, but said nothing. Aloan understood now why the howl had sounded less like rage than punishment. Ronan had been fighting a war that had ended years ago. Outside, the carriage horses stamped impatiently. Ronan followed her gaze. You know enough now. Enough for what? To make an informed choice. He led her back into the courtyard and stopped beside the open carriage. If I accept your courtship publicly, the kingdom will know before midday. Silverpine will know. Gavin will know. If you later walk away, they will make a story of it. Aloan touched the oak leaf at her throat. People have been making stories about me for years. This one could follow you forever. Then let it begin with something true. She reached past him and closed the carriage door. Ronan stared at her. Aloan, yesterday you gave me freedom because you thought I might be choosing from pain. I've had the night. I've seen what frightens you. I'm still here. His expression tightened with something almost painful. I cannot promise you there will never be another night like that. I'm not asking you to. She held his gaze. Accept me. Ronan searched her face as if offering one final opportunity to retreat. Then he removed the royal signet from his right hand and placed it in her palm. The metal was warm from his skin. By your own consent? By my own consent. He closed her fingers around the ring. Then I accept your courtship, Aloan Hartley. Across the courtyard, a figure stood beneath the archway. Gavin Mercer had heard them, but Aloan did not look away from Ronan. For the first time since her rejection, the future ahead of her had not been chosen by a mate, a pack, or fear. She had chosen it herself, and once the royal bells began to ring, there would be no returning to the woman she had been. By noon, the royal bells had done exactly what Ronan predicted. Aloan's name moved through Mooncrest faster than any official decree. Some called her brave. Others called her desperate. By the time Gavin found her outside the council gallery, Ronan's signet hung from a silver chain at her waist. His eyes settled on it. So it's official. The courtship is. Gavin looked as though he had rehearsed whatever came next and suddenly disliked every word. Rejecting you was a mistake. 2 years ago, Aloan would have given almost anything to hear that sentence. Now she only asked, why? My father expected me to strengthen Silverpine. An Omega mate would have damaged my standing. Shame crossed his face. I told myself choosing the pack over the bond made me responsible. Aloan touched the oak leaf beneath her collar. And when did you decide you were wrong? Gavin's silence answered before he did. This isn't about him being king. Maybe not entirely. Her voice stayed gentle. But you found the courage to regret losing me only after someone more powerful saw value in me. He flinched. Aloan, I don't hate you, Gavin. I just won't return to the woman who waited for you to change your mind. Footsteps approached. Ronan appeared with Everett and Dorian on their way to council. His attention sharpened when he saw Gavin, but he stopped several paces away. Do you need me? Aloan looked at him. No, Ronan nodded once. I'll be inside. Then he left. Gavin watched him go. He just walked away? He trusted my answer. Aloan entered the council chamber moments later to find Dorian addressing the assembled pack leaders. Royal courtship carries consequences beyond affection. Miss Hartley possesses neither alpha lineage nor political alliance, and her previous rejection will be used against the crown. Ronan's expression hardened. Aloan spoke before he could. Then let them use it. Dorian turned. This is not personal. It became personal when my rank became evidence against me. She walked to the table. Gavin rejected me because he believed an Omega would weaken his future. If this council believes the same, say it while I'm standing here. No one answered. Dorian studied her for a long moment. A queen requires strength. I agree. Aloan met his gaze. We disagree about where strength comes from. Ronan said nothing, but when she took the empty chair beside him, he moved it slightly to give her room. That small gesture meant more than a defense she had never requested. After the meeting, Marin intercepted Aloan near the infirmary. The healer carried a small cloth packet, her brow furrowed. I found this beneath the cabinet that shattered yesterday. She opened it. Inside lay several crushed brown-green leaves. Medicine? Aloan asked. Not anything stored in my infirmary. Marin rubbed a fragment between gloved fingers and immediately stopped. There's a bitter scent beneath it. Familiar, but I can't place it. Aloan remembered Ronan's sudden reaction to the blood and broken metal. Could it have affected him? I don't know yet. Marin folded the cloth carefully. But his episodes have become more frequent since the delegations arrived. I assumed the crowds were worsening his memories. Her eyes settled on the packet. Now I'm less certain. Before Aloan could respond, Everett appeared from the eastern corridor. His usual composure had vanished. Marin, find the king. What happened? Aloan asked. The eastern service gate. Everett lowered his voice. The inner lock has fresh scoring around the mechanism. Someone has been testing it. A chill moved across Aloan's skin. From outside. From inside. The three of them went still. Then a horn sounded from the outer wall. Once. Twice. 3 times. Everett drew his sword. A violent impact shook the lower floor, followed by screams. Ronan emerged from the council stairwell as guards rushed past him. Report. Eastern gate breached, Everett said. Unknown number inside. Another crash thundered through the citadel. Somewhere below, glass shattered. Ronan suddenly stopped. His nostrils flared. Aloan saw the color drain from his face before his hands began to tremble. Whatever had entered Mooncrest, he recognized something in its scent. His silver-gray eyes found hers. Get everyone into the inner chambers. Ronan, Aloan. His voice roughened, fear breaking through command. This time, you need to run. Run. Ronan ordered as another impact shook the eastern wing. Aloan had barely turned when 3 masked intruders surged through the lower passage. Everett met the first with his sword while royal guards rushed civilians toward the inner chambers. One attacker hurled a glass vial against a pillar. It burst in a dark spray. Ronan stopped breathing. The scent reached Aloan a second later, blood, smoke, and something bitter enough to sting her throat. Another vial shattered. Ronan staggered as though the corridor around him had vanished. The village, he rasped. Ronan. His eyes were fixed on something years away. Marin appeared beside Aloan, clutching the cloth packet she had found beneath the infirmary cabinet. She inhaled once and went pale. Battlewort. What? They used it in the Northern War. Mixed with blood and smoke, it could drive shifters into combat frenzy. Aloan stared at the crushed leaves in Marin's hand. The worsening episodes. The strange residue hidden beneath the cabinet. The tampered eastern lock. None of it had been coincidence. Someone had been preparing Ronan for this moment. A bolt suddenly flew toward 2 servants trapped beside the staircase. Ronan moved before anyone else. It struck his shoulder instead. He tore it free, but the fresh blood intensified the scent. A growl ripped from his chest. People screamed. Clear the hall. Everett shouted. Ronan dropped to one knee, fingers digging into the floor. Get them away from me. Another attacker broke past the guards and raised a blade over a fallen maid. Ronan looked at her, then at his trembling hands. Aloan saw the terrible decision before he made it. He could keep resisting the wolf and let innocent people die, or become the very thing the kingdom had spent years fearing. Ronan chose the people. His shift struck with brutal force. Cloth tore. Bones reshaped. A massive dark wolf filled the corridor, silver-gray eyes burning through a face built for violence. Nobles fled. At the sight of him, Ronan did not follow them. He went for the attackers. He knocked one away from the maid, crushed a weapon beneath his jaws, then planted his enormous body between the remaining intruders and the civilians behind him. The monster from every whispered story had finally appeared, and he was using every frightening part of himself to protect the people who had believed those stories. Within moments, the attack was over, but Ronan's battle was not. Battlewort still fouled the air. His claws scraped trenches into the stone. His head swung toward the fleeing crowd, and a savage snarl rolled through the corridor. Everett lifted his sword, grief visible beneath his discipline. Ronan, it's finished. The wolf did not seem to hear him. Everyone back, Marin warned. Gavin appeared at the inner doorway and seized Aloan's arm. Come on. She pulled free. Take the others. Have you lost your mind? Look at him. Eloan did. She saw teeth, blood, and enough strength to tear through anyone who approached. She also saw the man who had opened a carriage door instead of closing a cage. The man who had trusted her to answer Gavin and Dorian herself. The man who had just chosen strangers over his own safety. Everyone around Ronan stepped backward. Eloan stepped forward. Ronan. The wolf's head snapped toward her. A warning growl shook her bones. She stopped, terrified enough to feel her knees weaken. Then she moved again. The battle is over. Ronan advanced. You saved them. You don't have to fight anymore. His lips drew back. Behind Eloan, Marin whispered her name, begging her to stop. Eloan raised one empty hand. You told me pain can become cruelty. Her voice trembled. But you showed me we still choose what we do with it. The wolf crouched. Eloan's heart slammed against her ribs. So choose, Ronan. He lunged. She did not know whether he would stop. That was the truth. She chose to trust him anyway. Hot breath struck her palm. Eloan opened her eyes. Ronan stood inches away, his entire body shaking. Slowly, she touched the fur between his eyes. Come back. The snarl faded. His head lowered into her hand. Minutes later, Ronan collapsed inhuman. Formed beneath Everett's cloak, wounded and exhausted but himself. His eyes found Eloan first. Did I hurt anyone? No. Relief crossed his face before consciousness left him. Nearby, Everett tore the sleeve from a captured attacker. Burned into the man's forearm was the insignia of the Northern faction believed destroyed years ago. The war Ronan had survived had reached Mooncrest deliberately. But as Eloan held his bandaged hand, another truth had already spread through the silent hall. When everyone else stepped back from the wild-haired king, the rejected Omega had stepped forward again. By sunrise, the question moving through Mooncrest was no longer whether Ronan Blackwood was dangerous. It was who had spent weeks trying to make him prove that he was. Everett's investigation connected the battle wort hidden near the infirmary to the remnants of the Northern faction, while the damaged Eastern lock confirmed the attack had required help from within. Before noon, one of the captured intruders finally talked. A night watchman assigned to the Eastern Service Gate had been paid to weaken the lock and hide packets of battlewort near the infirmary, where blood, broken metal, and Ronan's old memories could do the rest. Everett arrested the watchman before he could flee. The conspiracy was contained, but Eloan barely heard the reports. She sat beside Ronan's bed while morning light crept across the royal infirmary. When he finally woke, his eyes went first to her, then to their joined hands. You stayed. Yes. Ronan slowly withdrew his fingers. Why? Eloan frowned. You know why. No, he pushed himself upright, wincing as his wounded shoulder protested. I know why you walked into that circle. I don't understand why you walked toward me yesterday. His voice dropped. What if I hadn't stopped? Eloan could have told him she knew he would. It would have been comforting. It also would have been a lie. I didn't know. Ronan stared at her. I was terrified. She let the admission stand without disguising it as certainty. I chose to trust you anyway. His face tightened. That choice could have killed you. Yes. Then don't make it again. Ronan reached for the royal signet chain on the bedside table and held it toward her. The courtship ends here. Eloan did not take it. Is that what you want? It's what keeps you safe. That wasn't my question. His hand lowered. Eloan rose. You gave me a carriage because you refused to let fear choose for me. Don't let it choose for you now. She left him with the signet still in his hand. That afternoon, Everett addressed the surviving delegations in the ceremonial hall. Brielle Sutton stood when his report ended. I withdrew because I believed what I had heard about the king, she admitted. Yesterday, I watched him take a bolt meant for people who could offer him nothing. I was wrong. Dorian followed with fewer words. And I mistook rank for strength. He inclined his head toward Eloan. I will not make that mistake again. Neither acknowledgement changed Eloan's posture. She no longer needed either one to know where she belonged. Gavin waited until the hall had nearly emptied before approaching. This time, he stopped several feet away. I owe you an apology without expecting forgiveness. Eloan listened. I made you carry the shame of my choice because admitting I feared losing status would have made me face what I was. He swallowed. I'm sorry. She studied him, finding no request hidden behind the words. Then become someone who never makes another woman pay for your fear. Gavin nodded. I'll try. She watched him leave without wishing he would turn around. That evening, Eloan returned to the moon circle. Ronan was already there. I thought you might come, he said. And I thought you might run again. A faint, rueful breath escaped him. I considered it. Why didn't you? Ronan looked at the empty boundary between them. Because sending you away would only be another way of controlling the outcome. He approached the circle but stopped at its edge. I cannot promise there will never be another battle inside me. Then don't. Aloan extended her hand. Promise you'll keep choosing what kind of man comes out of it. Ronan looked at her palm. And you? I'll make my own choices. The smallest smile touched his face. Then the man an entire hall had once waited for women to approach stepped forward himself. He entered the circle and stopped before Aloan without touching her. May I? She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers. Tomorrow the court expects my decision about the mating ceremony. Aloan glanced at the royal signet between them. Tomorrow, don't give them your decision. Ronan understood. Ours. Ours. Beneath the same moon that had once watched everyone retreat from him, they stood together, neither asking the other to surrender. The following evening, the moon circle waited for them one final time. Mooncrest's great hall was full again, but there was no line of candidates before Ronan Blackwood, no frightened woman preparing an excuse to retreat, and no rejected Omega standing at the edge wondering whether she belonged. Everett's investigation had closed the final gaps. Remnants of the northern faction had bribed a night watchman to weaken the eastern service gate and hide Battlewort near the infirmary. During the attack, they had mixed the herb's bitter scent with blood and smoke, deliberately awakening the war memories Ronan still carried. The watchmen and surviving conspirators were now in royal custody. The threat that had followed Ronan home was finally exposed. What remained tonight belonged to two people, not the kingdom watching them. Ronan entered without armor. His scar remained uncovered, and his dark hair fell untamed around his shoulders. He made no attempt to soften the appearance that had frightened the court when the convocation began. Across the circle, Aloan waited in a simple silver-blue gown. Her mother's oak leaf pendant rested against her heart, while Ronan's signet hung from the chain at her waist. Dorian stepped between them. By ancient law, the period of royal courtship is complete. Aloan Hartley, you stand here under no debt, command, or obligation. You may accept or refuse the mating bond freely. Ronan raised one hand. Before she answers, I need to answer something first. Dorian stepped aside. Ronan looked only at Aloan. When you first crossed this circle, I thought your pain had chosen for you. Later, I tried to send you away because mine was choosing for me. His voice remained steady. I cannot promise you a life without fear. I can promise I will never use my fear, my rank, or this bond to take your choices from you. Aloan closed her fingers around the oak leaf. 2 years earlier, another ceremony had taught her how it felt to have a man decide her worth before witnesses. This time, no one would speak for her. Ronan remained beyond the boundary. Aloan Hartley, knowing who I am and what I still carry, do you choose a life with me? She glanced once toward Silverpine. Gavin stood among his pack. Their eyes met, and he lowered his head without asking anything from her. Aloan turned back to Ronan. I choose the man who opened a door when he could have closed a cage. The man who trusted me to speak for myself. The man who was terrified of becoming a monster and still chose to protect people who feared him. Her voice softened. Yes, Ronan, I choose you. He still did not move. Aloan understood. A small smile touched her lips. Now ask me. Something vulnerable opened in Ronan's expression. He stepped toward the same boundary where women had once retreated from him. This time, the wild-haired Alpha King crossed the distance himself. He stopped before Aloan without touching her. Will you take me as your mate and stand beside me as my queen? Yes. Ronan offered his hand. Aloan placed hers into it. Only then did he close his fingers around hers. Warmth moved through their joined palms as the bond awakened, gentle and deep, carrying no command with it. Aloan waited for some great transformation. None came. She remained Aloan Hartley, Omega, healer, daughter, woman. She had never needed a crown to become worthy. The kingdom recognizes Aloan Hartley as its chosen queen, Dorian announced. Marin wiped a tear from her cheek. Everett bowed. Brielle smiled among the delegates. Later, when celebration had softened into distant music, Aloan found Ronan beneath the stars on the terrace. She unclasped her mother's necklace. Ronan immediately recognized what she was doing. Aloan, That was hers. And she gave it to me so I would remember who I was. Eloan carefully fastened the silver oak leaf around one thick strand of his untamed hair. I think she would understand why I want you to carry it with me now. Ronan went still beneath her hands. Everyone looked at this hair and saw something that needed taming, she whispered. I never did. His fingers covered hers. And everyone looked at you and saw someone waiting to be chosen. He lowered his forehead to hers. They were wrong about that too. Once, an entire hall had stepped away from Ronan Blackwood. Eloan had stepped forward. When his darkest fear became real, she had stepped forward again. But tonight completed what those moments had begun. Ronan had crossed the distance too. Neither had rescued the other. Neither had been made whole by a crown or a bond. They had learned something harder. That true strength could remain gentle, that devotion did not require possession, and that love mattered most when two people were free enough to choose it. Beneath the moon, the silver oak leaf gleamed in Ronan's wild hair as he and Eloan walked back toward the waiting kingdom side by side.